works. And
Debating standing or sitting.
Hi, and welcome everyone. We are just waiting a few moments to allow for more attendees. So if you haven't gotten yourself a glass of water, a snack, need to run to the restroom, feel free to do that while we wait. And we will begin a little bit after 12, probably 12:05, just to make sure that we have everyone who wants to be here is here. We appreciate you. We thank you for coming. You should hear us, but we won't be able to hear you. I'll go through some more housekeeping logistics in just a few, but we will start momentarily. Thanks, everyone. All right, it looks like we have almost 186 people. It keeps going up and counting. And so I want to welcome everyone today. I am delighted to be here. Good morning and good afternoon to you from wherever you're joining us. My name is Rachel Gibson, and I'm the director of the Center for Victim Service Professionals here at the National Center for Victims of Crime. I bring you greetings on behalf of our executive director, Renee Williams. Today, we're going to talk about the crossroads of technology and financial fraud. And we are delighted to have a conversation with the experts who are assisting victims. My esteemed colleagues from the FINRA Investors Education Foundation and the Cybertech Division, CyberCrime Support Network, and the National Network to End Domestic Violence's SafetyNet Project will lead us in a riveting discussion and will answer questions from the audience should time allow. Some housekeeping notes. This discussion is in webinar mode, meaning you should be able to hear us, but we won't be able to hear you. If you have any technical difficulties, please message myself or Cameron Saylor. If you have a question during the discussion, please feel free to put them in the Q&A area located at the bottom of your screen so that we can keep track and triage as we go. If there are questions we don't get to during this conversation, we will compile them and ask our presenters to provide feedback and then circulate them after the panel with the follow-up materials. As you may have noticed, this panel is being recorded, and we will share this recording and any resources and handouts within the next few weeks. If there are no other housekeeping notes or questions, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rob Massio with FINRA to moderate today's panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel. Really happy to be here with you all. I'm excited to have this conversation. We have a fantastic group of experts from a variety of different backgrounds, which I think is going to really add to a wonderful conversation. We do encourage you, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I've enjoyed reading, watching where everybody's from here. I'm located in South Florida. I'm originally from the DC area. I saw somebody on here from Salisbury, Maryland. Fun fact, I went to college in Salisbury a long time ago. Not too often that you see somebody from Salisbury show up on here, but very excited to be with you. My name is Rob Massio. I'm a director with FINRA's Office of Investor Education and the FINRA Foundation. And we are going to have a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I'm joined with Erica Olsen, Keith Betancourt, Cindy Liebitz, and Rachel Gibson, who's going to jump in as well and provide some context. But we're going to have a wonderful conversation. To start off, I'd like to have each one of our panelists here just talk a little bit about who they are, their respective organizations, and kind of their role within that organization, and discuss why crossroads of financial fraud is something that's important to talk about. So let's start with Erica. You're on the first box of my little Brady Bunch screen. So let's start with you, Erica.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Rachel. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Erica Olsen. I am the director of the SafetyNet Project at the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I'm based in Western Massachusetts, and our project, the SafetyNet Project, looks at the intersection of technology and safety for survivors of abuse, including domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. We look at everything that all the ways that technology can impact somebody's confidentiality, their privacy, their civil rights, their accessibility, in terms of their safety. So one avenue of that, or one of the paths that we have to look at when we're thinking about technology and safety, is around financial access, our financial, how we control our finances. We use a lot of technology when it comes to accessing our finances and controlling our financial information. And that is definitely something that abusers regularly misuse, unfortunately, as a part of a much larger context of financial abuse, which many of you know is a big part of domestic violence. So there's kind of a context within a context within a context that we'll be talking about today. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. Cindy, let's turn it over to you from Georgia.
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Cindy Liebes. I'm the Chief Program Officer with the CyberCrime Support Network. CSN is a national nonprofit whose mission is to serve individuals and small businesses who've been impacted by cybercrime. CSN is a public-private partnership in that we actually work with other government entities, foundations, corporations, and nonprofits to partner together to fight cybercrime, because we as individuals and small businesses, we're all under attack from cyber criminals, online scammers, international fraud syndicates. And so we really truly recognize that working together, we can ultimately make individuals, small businesses stay safer online and really know how to recognize, report, and recover from cybercrime. Cybercrime, internet fraud, or just basic fraud is something I am passionate about. I came to CSN after retiring from the Federal Trade Commission. I worked there for 35 years. I retired as the regional director for the Southeast region of the FTC. And for my entire career, I prosecuted telemarketing and internet fraud cases, ultimately to stop the scams and to get money back for the victims. But I also personally believe that education and working directly with those who have been impacted by fraud is vitally important, because when individuals understand what they should look out for, what are some of the red flags, and how they can help to protect themselves, then ultimately we can stop or at least cut the muse off from these scam artists and hopefully make an impact.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. And Keith, let's turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to some of you on the East Coast here. Tough act to follow Cindy, but my name is Keith Betancourt. I'm a manager on FINRA's Member Supervision Cybersecurity team. For those of you who don't know what FINRA is exactly, so we are a nonprofit that regulates and examines essentially the brokerage industry and the registered reps of the brokerage industry. There's right around 3,600 brokerage firms right now and a little over 600,000 registered representatives that FINRA regulates and examines. And I think that it's really important in my role as a manager on the cybersecurity team, because it's really core to our mission statement of investor protection. Many of the issues that we see on the cybersecurity team start as complaints from individual investors who have either had their personally identified PII stolen, or some other fraud has been perpetrated against them through the internet or through some other sort of mechanism. So really happy to be here and excited to chat with these folks today.
Great, thanks Keith. Sure. And just a little background on who the FINRA Foundation is. I know Keith talked a little bit about who FINRA is. I was trying to purposely be vague so he could cover that. But the FINRA Foundation, it's a subsidiary of FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And we are a nonprofit that focuses on building financial capability throughout America. And we do that through education and research. We have a whole lot of different research in different areas that we focus on. And we do a lot of work with partners. So for example, we work closely with NCVC and Rachel. Through a partnership, we work closely with Cindy and CSN, CyberCrime Support Network, through a partnership. And my primary role with the foundation is on our investor protection campaign. So Keith mentioned that investor protection is part of FINRA's mission. So FINRA's mission is investor protection and market integrity. And part of that foundation role is to help individuals, help advocates understand what they can do to protect themselves in a variety of different situations. And today we're talking about what individuals and how advocates can help when faced with technology and financial fraud situations. And with that being said, Keith, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing through the cyber examinations that you and your team are conducting. What are some of the trends and some of the common themes that you're noting?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. So I think, a lot of attention has been paid to ransomware over the last year or so now, give or take. And I think that's, for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to focus more on what's really aimed at individuals, because those attacks typically at this point are kind of aimed at larger organizations with deep pockets. But one thing I will kind of throw out there as far as ransomware goes is we've seen a couple of times in our investigations this tactic known as triple extortion, where bad actors are breaking into an organization, stealing customers' information, customers' PII, and then that's the first part. The second, the double extortion is, all right, now we're going to threaten the organization to release all of their sensitive information or PII out into onto the internet so everybody can grab it. And the third part of it is now the next step is, now that they've got all these people's PII contact information, now they're going directly to individuals and threatening them to pay a smaller ransom one, right? We've got your social security number, we've got all your information, now pay us, so we're going to expose that. Or two, and I think probably more to their end, putting pressure on the initial organization that they stole the PII from in an effort to really kind of ramp up the pressure to get them to pay that, exorbitant millions of dollars is what we've seen ransom payment. But when you kind of drop it down to the more individual level, we have seen since COVID started a huge rise in what we call imposter websites. So it's very easy. You don't really need to be technically proficient any longer to set up a website. Costs a couple bucks through a lot of the different registrars out there. And what happens is they're impersonating either a firm or a registered representative of a firm, and they'll pull down public information to really, in an effort to really, give that person, that imposter, some legitimacy, give their site some legitimacy, so people are kind of put at ease to invest. And I would also say, almost exclusively, these investments are in the crypto space. It's really just preying on people's greed and FOMO of, oh, I can't miss the next big thing, I got to get in on these crypto investments, and really preying on people with the added layer of adding on, we're a registered firm with FINRA, we're oversighted by the SEC, it's your money safe here. So that's the first thing. The second biggest threat I would say out there that we see is customer account takeovers. Typically, a lot of these things are intertwined, but typically we see them start with a phishing link, right? Just your click here, or masking it as an email from your financial institution asking you to log in to verify some information that can lead to a takeover of the customer's email account, which kind of, at this point, with all of our information stored within our email in one way, shape, or form, it really kind of gives you the keys to the kingdom to access bank accounts, brokerage accounts, you name it. Those are the biggest things we're seeing right now.
Thanks, Keith. And Cindy, I would imagine you're probably seeing a lot similar types of concerns, not necessarily focusing on brokerage firms, right? So I'm sure it's a much wider picture. I know
Very
Keith
much so.
Yep. Keith, so Keith's regulatory purview would be within the brokerage firm, but Cindy, you with CSN, you have such a larger view, and love to hear your thoughts about how some of the things Keith have mentioned plays into the work that you're seeing.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. It's exactly the same types of things. According to the FTC, the top scams this past year, identity theft and imposter scams. And when you think about that, those types of things happen not only in the investor area, but also throughout. How many of us out there, I can't see a show of hands, but how many of us have gotten either a call or an email about a social security, your social security card has been used, or your taxes, an IRS scam. Government imposter scams are prevalent all around. One of the things that we see is imposter scams can include just a variety of different types of contacts with individuals. So it can be, like I said, some government agency, but it can also be a call or an email from a law enforcement agency telling you you're going to be arrested if you don't pay some money immediately. And immediacy is one of the things that is just a good indicator that it's a scam. Some others are, you missed your jury duty, and if you don't pay us right now, you're going to be thrown in jail. Unemployment benefit scams, with all of the unemployment issues or the COVID issues, unemployment benefit scams and other support scams are really relevant, really out there right now. When I was at the FTC, I worked on a variety of tech support scams. I don't know how many of you have gotten an email or your computer has had something flashing on it saying they're from Microsoft and they can see that there is some sort of virus on your computer, and please contact us. They'll take over your computer, they'll remote onto it. Sometimes they can get all of your financial information, or in fact, they can tell you you need to purchase some useless devices from them or useless stuff from them that you don't need to pay for. Grandparent and family member scams. I don't know how many of you have been impacted by that, but that personally hit my family, where my father lost thousands of dollars because he thought he was sending money to my nephew who supposedly had been injured in Mexico. Needless to say, my nephew was not in Mexico. And thankfully, from actually a banker who was out there, who when my dad went back to go get more money to send to the scam artist, the banker called my brother and said, okay, let's just check to see if your nephew really needs the money. So I encourage all of you out there. The other things that are near and dear to my heart, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about it, another type of imposter scam, romance scams, or scams, confidence scams that are affecting individuals. Because we're all at home right now with COVID, people are lonely, they're at home, they're chatting with folks, they're playing games on the computer, and there are scam artists out there trying to take money from people, because currently it's said that 1 in 4 people have been impacted by cybercrime every year. And it's a $340 billion, $340 billion have been lost to cybercrime every year. I mean, that's millions of us, and probably everybody knows somebody that's been impacted.
Absolutely, you're so right, Cindy. And it's such a horrible story to hear about your experience, your family members' experience with these type of scams. I'm going to throw this out to the group, just because you've talked a lot. Both you and Keith have talked about imposter scams. You've talked about grandparent scams. What are some basic principles that people can do to help protect themselves and to help kind of identify some of these scams, or to vet whether or not this website or email is legitimately from who they say they're from?
You know, and if you don't mind, I'll give just a couple of tips that I would say, but the most important thing is to slow down. Really take some time to think, and I'll bet Keith would say exactly the same thing, and probably Erica. Slow down, think, check it out, because oftentimes it's that immediacy. You said the FOMO, fear of missing out, Keith, but I think a lot of times the scam artists use that tactic. They want you to do something immediately. So if you'll slow down and think about it, that's one of the protections that you can use. Some of the other things that we encourage people, don't share too much. We're all guilty of sharing way too much online, on Facebook. And that can lead to identity theft. That can give people information so that they can commit imposter scams, so that they know the name of your child or your grandchild, and so that when they contact you, you truly believe that they are someone affiliated with you. And then recognizing phishing attacks. So many of these attacks happen online because of phishing, because someone's just throwing something out there. They're pretending to be your bank, your credit card, and you're clicking on a link. And so slow down. Don't ever click on that link. Check it out. Make sure that that link is valid. So what you do is you call the bank, or you go onto the actual website that you know, or the number that you know to call, or the person that you know. Call your grandchild or your son and make sure that that's a real thing. Because as I've seen with many of the scams that I work with at CSM, what we've seen is so much of this is personalized, and they are socially engineering you. They're using these tactics. So those are some of the comments and the protections that I would share.
Yeah, I would just add on to that multi-factor authentication. I mean, wherever you can implement two-factor, multi-factor biometric authentication processes or controls on your financial accounts, do it. So if you click on a bad phishing link that's trying to take over your email account, and all of a sudden they've got your login credentials for your brokerage account or bank account or whatever it ends up being. Even if they have that, if you have another factor of authentication in place, be it a text message that's sent to your phone, your thumbprint, those are really great controls, and I think the vast majority of the individual attacks that we have seen where someone's account's been taken over could have been prevented if they had multi-factor authentication in place on their accounts. And if you work with a bank or work with a financial institution that doesn't offer it, ask them why. It's the part of the reason is because it makes it harder for customers to log into their account to buy stuff, right? But the flip side of that is it also makes someone that's trying to break into your account, makes it much more difficult for them to get into your account to take stuff out of your account. So that's my one thing is multi-factor authentication.
No, I think that's a great point. And I know for a lot of people, multi-factor authentication just sounds like a burden, right? To say, oh, I'm going to have to respond with the text, I'm going to have to do a finger, whatever it may be. But it is so much more of a burden when some sort of takeover happens or some sort of a fraud happens because you didn't have it in place. So it really is a simple step. That's something that I would encourage everybody on this webinar to, they don't have it for themselves to do it, but also go out and practice what you preach. So, when you're working with individuals out in the community, make sure that you're encouraging them to do the same. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get Erica in the conversation in the conversation here. Erica, you bring such a unique background, and I know when we were first talking about this webinar, one of the things that I was trying to wrap my head around is how the work that you do necessarily translate to this conversation we're having about financial fraud and technology. And the more that you and I in this group have chatted, the more I'm starting to kind of see the light and understand that you have a very important role here and very important information to share. So I'd like to turn it over to you and just kind of help explain to everybody what you're doing here and how you fit into this conversation.
Thank you. And I appreciate the honesty around that too, because I think a lot of people really struggle to see those connections. And I'll take a moment to, I think, talk about a little bit why I think that happens. The reality that we know exists is that 99% of survivors that are asked say that they experience financial abuse as part of the abuse perpetrated by a partner or somebody who's close to them. The lens that we're looking through is looking at interpersonal violence. And most often that is going to be somebody who is a romantic partner to the person. It could be somebody they're married to, somebody they live with, somebody they've dated. This also happens in the context of caregivers, though, who have a very, very close, intimate relationship with the person and know all of their information. So in the context of an intimate relationship, this abuse happens a lot. Financial abuse is very often, as I said, 99% of survivors say that financial abuse is an aspect of the abuse that they are experiencing. And why that is so incredibly important for us to understand is that without financial freedom, it is nearly impossible for survivors to truly achieve safety, to truly feel and be safe in their lives, because your finances control so much of what we need in order to be safe. a very frequent type of abuse that we see is an intimate partner or person to the victim that takes out a credit report or takes out a line or runs a credit report or takes out a line of credit in the survivor's name. That kind of activity can be so damaging to the survivor that when it comes time, when they're trying to leave the person, they want to flee, they want to establish housing someplace else, their ability to get and secure housing independently can be completely diminished and limited because of that person's financial abuse, because of what's showing up on their credit score. So much, our ability to get a new phone line and just move to a carrier and everybody runs your credit. And so when your credit is extremely damaged by financial abuse, that really follows somebody. And so we know that that is something that has existed for a long time. We also see a significant amount of coerced financial abuse. And I think it's something that we just generally don't talk about enough. And that includes coerced debt. There is a significant amount of debt that survivors have and have to hold on to because they were coerced into signing something. They may be forced by the abusive person to sign over power of attorney, to sign all sorts of financial documents, and to sign on to debts. We also see an intersection for interpersonal relationships around finances when people are trying to separate, and all sorts of things get written into divorce decrees. I've seen this throughout my family members who have gotten divorced. I've seen it over and over in this work. Divorce decrees can, in that process between lawyers, can cover a whole range of options where the parties are agreeing to split debt, things like that, but then they don't hold up. They don't hold up in the way that actually supports a survivor. So you have a survivor who is trying to get away from an incredibly abusive person, will say yes and agree to almost anything in desperation in that moment. They sign off on, splitting debt, or they may have not been responsible for taking on. Then the abusive person after that goes and files bankruptcy, and the survivor is completely on the line for all of this. And so we see a range of types of financial abuse that really impact survivors and their ability to be able to be independent and free from the abuse.
Thanks, Erica. That's, such a great explanation. And I saw in the chat that somebody posted that they're a domestic violence victim advocate, and almost all of their victim reports have some kind of financial abuse. And I think that's so interesting and so telling, because oftentimes I think individuals kind of get bucketed into groups. They're a domestic violence survivor or victim, they're a financial fraud victim. But there's such an intersection, and they often do overlap. And I think a lot of people need to kind of change the lens and the view in which they're approaching these situations, because it's often not easily bucketed. And the more that we can talk about that, and the more that we can see those intersections, the better we'll all be able to help those individuals.
And Rob, I just want to interject here, because I was trying to hold my peace, and I said this is a great way for me to talk about some of the work we do here at the National Center, because we recognize that victims come with all types of trauma, all types of victimization. And so when we understand, we use this term in our work, polyvictimization, right? Where I have worked with victims who have come to my domestic violence program for domestic violence. And as we begin to have conversations, we realize they also are victims of identity fraud, stalking, sexual assault, sexual abuse. And so sometimes it's the crime they come to us with is actually the least of what they want treated, or they want to get fixed. And so it's important for service providers, and I use that term service provider loosely. I'm going to use the word advocate, because whether you work at FINRA in the cyber tech division like Keith, whether you are a victim advocate, whether you are a banker, whether you are a grocery store worker, we all can be advocates. And so because of the way in which victims of crime, especially with an intimate partner lens, are connected to their communities. We each play a part. And so the silos that Erica, was speaking of earlier, we kind of have to make sure we're all at the table when we think about community coordinated responses, and how you have to have everyone, anyone, all ones who are going to be interacting with the victim along their journey. We all have to understand those partnerships and those relationships. And so here at the National Center, that's one of the things that we really, strive towards with our National Victim Connect hotline, is that whether you're a victim of any and all types of crime, we're here to provide you with services, because we understand that there may be other things that you're experiencing that you may want resources and support on. And so I really just wanted to interject with that piece as well.
I think that's a great bunch of points you had there, Rachel. And it's important when you all are working with individuals that you recognize and understand that, like you said, Rachel, what they're initially coming with likely isn't the only challenge that they're facing. And to have that conversation, ask those questions that continues the conversation moving down a direction where you can kind of understand the whole picture and everything that's encompassed in what this individual is experiencing. And we all know that the trauma comes in different forms, and people can withstand various different levels of trauma based on who they are and the type of trauma that they've experienced. So I think it's really important to make sure that we all as advocates understand that and approach each situation with that in mind. And I know one of the things that, Erica, she keeps referencing survivors, and it's such an important term. And it's something that I think a lot of people might gloss over and might not necessarily pay attention to. It's the language that we use when we're talking about individuals who have been subjected to, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's financial fraud, whatever it may be. The terminology we use can have an impact on their willingness to participate and their willingness to give additional information. So keep in mind when you're working with people about kind of changing that narrative. Are we subconsciously placing blame on them? Are we saying, well, you shouldn't have fallen for that? Well, that's not the case. Using the term that you fell for is the wrong term to use. Our role is to be able to help them overcome some of the challenges that they're faced and get them back on track to living a healthy life. That being said, I want to talk about resources. We're a little over halfway through, and I am going to venture to say that resources for individuals that Cindy and Keith interact with are going to probably be different than the resources that Erica might lend to people that she interacts with. And I want to make sure that we have time to talk about those resources on both ends, because like we've mentioned, there often is an overlap between the different groups. So let's start. Keith, I see that your mic's off. Let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think I would just kind of direct everyone to a really quick alert on ic3.gov that really illustrates, it's an alert on romance scams, but there's so many different angles that intertwine or entangled besides just romance scams. It's just a really good, what everybody's been talking about just kind of made me think of it, how intertwined these things are. There's an imposter website, there's, the urgency, just all the different angles that fraudsters are going to take to try to get at you are kind of contained in that notice. But as far as other resources go, particular to FINRA and particular to the brokerage industry, I mean, the easiest way or the quickest way to get action if you're experiencing some sort of broker-dealer fraud, or even financial fraud for that matter, would be contact the firm, get in touch with their fraud department, get in touch with their compliance department. Those people are trained to deal with this, to investigate, to figure out, what exactly happened, how to get restitution, and are trained to kind of, liaise with you and the firm and the any kind of legal apparatus they need to get involved with. And 9 times out of 10 or 95 times out of 100, you'll be able to get your answers and recover through that mechanism. If that doesn't work, the Department of Financial Services or whatever the equivalent is in your state is a good resource. And one I think that people tend to, for some reason, not think about is local law enforcement. A crime has been committed, right? Someone broke into your not your house, but your email or your bank account, and they took your money, they took your personally identifiable information, contact local law enforcement. Most jurisdictions now have people that are trained to deal with internet crime, and can, for some reason, I think we think, this didn't really happen in my town, so I'm not going to call the Suffolk County Police because it happened out in the internet. I understand it. It makes sense in some weird way, but local law enforcement should also be there to help.
And I'd like to add some of the other resources out there. There are wonderful resources for cybercrime and a variety of crimes. From my past, the Federal Trade Commission at ftc.gov is a great resource. They have wonderful materials, but they will also provide information, and they have a database of complaints, and they work with the IC3 to have complaints that law enforcement can look at, and they produce trend reports and show what are the frauds that are out there, who is it impacting, where are they occurring from, and who are they directing those frauds to. That's ftc.gov. But from CSN's perspective, we also have some great victim-centered solutions, if you will, or victim-centered programs that we've done as resources for consumers. I'll touch on them real briefly, but we have a military and veteran program that's funded by the Craig Newmark Philanthropies and Comcast. And in that, we're working with veteran service organizations and military service organizations to give information to military, those in the military and veterans and their families, to provide them with information so that they can be educated and promote safe data care and be educated about cyber crime, because the median financial loss for veterans is actually over 40% higher than for other individuals. We also have another program starting soon that's funded by Trend Micro called our Secure Together program. And it's in partnership with Consumer Reports. Volunteer facilitators will be able to help their friends and families with data care issues, because a lot of times you can tell people to use, for example, two-factor authentication or to update their computers and their digital devices, but they don't do it. They know they should, but they don't. Well, this program is working with volunteers who will help those who are less comfortable or are less cyber aware, and they will sit down with them and do 4 things. Help them implement two-factor authentication, update their computers and digital devices, update their privacy settings, and also learn about phishing. But the most important, and the program near and dear to my heart, and that is funded by the FINRA Educational Foundation and Rob, it is our peer support program for romance scam survivors. It is a program that is just been phenomenal. Victims who are romance scam sufferers or survivors suffer higher rates of other issues, like you talked about, whether it's other issues of depression and anxiety and just feelings of loneliness. And we understand that 1 in 7 individuals has been targeted by romance scams. And there's just huge financial losses, but the emotional impacts are devastating. So we have a program, it's a peer support program. We do it with 10 weekly 1-hour sessions on Zoom, and there's 8 to 10 participants in each group. We have finished our first group. We're in the middle of our second group and taking intaking applicants for our third group. But the way it works is there's a curriculum for each session, which each session includes educational material on frauds and scams and cybersecurity and safety topics, then information and support for mental wellness by a licensed counselor from Given Hour, and then follow-up resources and materials for those survivors. And I just want to, in closing, I just want to read to you some of the comments we got from the first session real quickly. One person said, during the 10 weeks of sessions, I found that I was not alone. It gave me insight into how scammers work. I learned how to avoid on social media. I learned what to avoid on social media sites, and I became more aware of how to protect myself and my resources. And another person said, now that I've completed the program, I find strength and dignity to move forward in a positive way. So I encourage those who may have and work with folks who have been impacted by romance scams to please go to our website at fightcybercrime.org. There's great resources. We actually have a resource information. It's got thousands of wonderful resources on a variety of different cyber crimes. It also has wonderful materials on romance scams. And in addition, you can apply online for the program, and you can, as advocates out there, you can also help folks apply online, because we really encourage folks to get into, those who have been survivors of romance scams, to get into this program, because it's wonderful. And it's really the most heartwarming thing I think I've done in my career. Thank you, Rob.
Cindy, I just pulled up that alert. So just to kind of put some numbers around that, this is just what's been reported to ic3.gov. So it's probably just the tip of the iceberg. But so far from January through July of this year, 1,800 romance scam complaints, approximate losses of over $133 million.
Yeah, it is huge, and it's devastating. And I, even on a personal note, on my Facebook, I get all these friend requests from people I don't know, from men all over the place. I'm happily married and I don't want these friends. But it's really scary when someone is lonely, or someone maybe puts on there that they're divorced, or even they're playing, Words with Friends or Scrabble online. They're out there. They're often, it's very, very difficult to find these people. So the resources online, whether it's at IC3, FTC, or at on our CSN website on Fight Cybercrime, please look for those resources. And if you know anybody that's impacted, I really encourage them to sign up for our program, because the course, it really does give them great assistance.
Wanted to jump in. I think we might have lost Rob, but I'm sure he's coming back in. Wanted to jump in with some specifics about the domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking survivor, the specific resources that might be helpful for survivors of those types of crimes. So first of all, I think, if you're not familiar already with some of the context of abuse and the ways that abuse can play out, and the intersection of finances and finances, technology, and abuse, helping yourself to understand that a little bit better so you're prepared for that is always a really good first step. We have at NNEDV, we have an economic justice project. We have a fantastic team of people who worked on a moving ahead curriculum, helping survivors to gain economic freedom. We also have a fantastic, the EJ Project has a great program called the Independence Project, which is a credit building project for survivors. So when survivors are struggling to be able to get housing, to be able to establish independence from an abusive person, that project helps them to reestablish and rebuild their credit so that they can do those things. So that is, I think, more and more of those projects need to be developed, because that is an incredibly important piece of it, as we talked about before. The other thing is understanding a bit of the misconceptions and the taboos and the kind of things that might be holding somebody back from really talking about the financial abuse. And I think that that's a big piece for survivors of abuse, because when somebody is in a relationship and financial abuse is occurring and they're trying to get money, say during a divorce or during a separation or anything like that, there are a lot of stigmas and a lot of misconceptions that will immediately kind of assume that that person is out for money, things like that. And it holds people back sometimes from saying what they need in terms of finances, from really naming it as financial abuse and exploring all the options that they may have for trying to gain control over finances in the context of a relationship. The other thing is that a lot of the safety planning that should happen with survivors can be really different and completely opposite in some ways from anything we've heard or been taught in terms of the context of healthy financial relationships, right? In terms of the prevention messaging that we get about establishing healthy financial relationships with people we share our finances with and things like that. It's all about not having secrets and making sure that we know about each other's finances in some way, shape, or form. And for survivors, a lot of the safety planning is going to go against that. It's going to go and look at things like setting up an account that the abusive person doesn't know about, setting up a pay-as-you-go phone that the abusive person doesn't know about. And so that can be hard for survivors who feel like they might be doing something wrong if they have this sense of like that they don't want to be dishonest or anything, but it might be what they need to do to be able to establish communication lines, phones that are not being surveilled by the abusive person, finances that can't be accessed by the abusive person. That might be what they need to do. The other piece that's going to be so important is really looking at how safety and technology strategies differ from survivors than other people. The general safety strategies that we often can hear may not be applicable for survivors. And that is because a lot of times the design of products or just the general the privacy, security, and safety settings that are in our, within our bank accounts or anything like that, they're often set up assuming that the people who we share a home with, the people that are close to us, that those are safe individuals. And unfortunately, we know that that's often not the case. So we actually, we want to help survivors to reestablish and reset accounts with all of those personal identifying information, looking at that through a different lens. Every account that you have has those security questions that ask you about where, the street you grow up on, your mother's maiden name, and all these things. This is information that an abusive partner is going to know. And so if a survivor is trying to lock down their accounts, trying to gain privacy and security from an intimate person in their life, then thinking about how they do that strategically might be important. The other thing is that another tactic that can be really helpful, because such a large amount of survivors tell us about the credit reports being misused. For putting temporary freezes on credit reports can be an incredibly helpful strategy for survivors. They can lift the freeze if they're applying for something, then they put it back on. That can stop an abusive person from misusing it in any way. Also, you want to think about their technology, their actual devices, because if say stalkerware is being used and the abuser is monitoring their technology, they could try to reestablish accounts or reset their passwords, and the abusive person's going to know about it. So the entire assessment and conversation about what the person needs in order to gain control over their finances needs to have that lens of what does the abusive person have access to? What do they know about you? What can they access so that they get back into your account if they live with you and can get access to your device and basically get around even the two-factor. So those are the conversations that you want to have if the abusive person is somebody who's close to them.
And Erica, I was going to just add, a lot of those phenomenal tips that you just shared are great for anybody, because the reality, as you said, it may be somebody who knows that information, but we so often share that information online or in applications, or so, you don't have to use, you really don't have to use, when you get those security questions, you don't have to give the right answer. You can actually change those security answers to something that only you know. So even an abusive family member, abusive spouse, they won't know what you've changed it to. Or if it's just for anybody, you can use any answer. It's just something you remember. The other thing, strong passwords. It needs to be something you remember, but it doesn't have to be something that other people know. It should never be anything other people know. So some of those tips were amazing. And I thought, you know, in reality, we all need to follow a lot of what you were saying, Erica.
Thanks, Cindy. And it looked like Keith, you wanted to jump in with some tips?
I did. I also wanted to throw out there that the FINRA.org, the For Investors page, ton of great information on how to keep your accounts secure, and just kind of general investor awareness. And one thing I wanted to add to what Erica was saying, and there are certainly ways around, you know, two-factor, but in a situation where someone is trying to set up a whole new life, right, a whole new financial life, having that additional control in place where, you know, they need the fingerprint or they need the text message is just kind of one more layer that can be added in to try to, you know, reestablish themselves.
And I always think about it too as options, right? Because options, the more options that a victim has, the better they are able to secure their account. And the option that might be best for me may not be best for Erica or Cindy. And so when we as service providers understand all of the different options, and even if we don't know all of the options, research those options. When we work with tech companies about creating more options means more access to better safety planning strategies for all victims of crime, whether it be intimate partner violence, financial fraud, whatever that may be. And so, you know, thinking about how do we ensure that victims of crime have the knowledge of what their options are and what works best for them. Because I think the other piece of this is that they're going to be the experts in their lives. They're going to know what, you know, what's best for them. And not only just them, I think, you know, we take this conversation a step further and we're talking about the immediate issue of what maybe that adult victim may have. But when we think about children who also may be involved, and especially I know victims whose partners have set up credit accounts in their children's names, right? So not only is it the abuse that the adult might be experiencing, but also the identity fraud of their children. And so, you know, taking that a step further and including them in this kind of process of locking down not only your account, but their accounts as well, and giving them really good financial education around that. I think our work, we talk about it in buckets, right? Prevention and intervention. So that intervention is all of that really good strategy and safety planning process we, you know, talked about today, but then some of those preventative strategies that we can have those conversations with the victims and that we're working with, as well as keeping their children and loved ones in mind. Because not only children, I know in the case of my own family, my grandmother experienced that, right? And so our older adults who may be experiencing this and helping them navigate that process. So we're down to the last 5 minutes, and I knew this was going to happen. Erica, it looks like you have one other point, so I'm going to let you make that point, and then it looks like Rob is back, but we'll allow for our panelists to give us one or two last final thoughts they want to leave us with, and then I'll wrap up with some housekeeping measures.
Thanks
you.
for.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Rob.
No, I was just going to say thanks for stepping in, everybody. Apparently, I had some sort of technology issue, which I guess is fitting for this. So now I'm on an iPad, which obviously the camera is not as good. But sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Erica, go ahead.
No, it just occurred to me that one of the things that we haven't talked about, and I think is incredibly important just to mention, that depending on where if you're working with a survivor of abuse, depending on where they are in the situation personally, if they believe that locking down any accounts, removing any access of the abusers to their information would be a safety issue for them at the moment and could increase abuse, we have to listen to that and help them navigate that. That's often where trying to set up a separate phone, a pay-as-you-go phone that they might be able to have control of, an account that the abuser doesn't know, that's sometimes where that can come into play, because as many of you already know, when the person and the survivor starts to leave or has left, that can be the most dangerous time for them, and abuse can significantly increase. So it's always incredibly important that any suggestions or strategies that we are giving have that in context and have that in mind. So we're only suggesting, you know, cutting off access to the abuser, and if the survivor really truly thinks that it's a safe thing for them to do at the time. Otherwise, it's a strategy that they're planning for later on.
Thanks, Erica. And so I'll give the last final words. I'll start with Keith, and then Cindy, if you want to give us your final thoughts, we'll end with that.
Sure. I'll just throw out there, we're kind of standing here on the precipice of, National Cybersecurity Month. Tons of great resources that everyone's kind of spoken about, but also CISA.gov has a themed week-by-week approach to Cybersecurity Month. I would just recommend taking a look at that also.
And my final pitch is to encourage everyone to please check out fightcybercrime.org. I think it's got great resources for those who want to recognize, report, and recover from cybercrime. And I think if I have a final tip for folks, it's to slow down. Don't let the cyber criminals talk you into things or talk your clients into things. Check them out and really do not send money, and never, never, never pay with a gift card, because that's always a fraud. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone. And I appreciate you all joining us today. I, as always, learned so much, and I'm just was delighted to be here. And as Keith said, we're getting ready to honor Cybersecurity Awareness Month as well as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So for those of you who are part of our listserv, be on the lookout for another event similar to this, where we're going to dive deeper into some conversations around financial fraud, financial abuse, and the intersections with intimate partner violence. Our theme that we're going with here at the National Center is the true costs of domestic violence. So stay tuned for more details there. As a reminder, this panel was recorded, and we will share the recording and any other subsequent resources today. I know many of you all put in the chat box and in the Q&A panel your questions that unfortunately we didn't get to today, but my goal in the next couple of weeks will be to call those together, reach out to our expert panelists, and have them fill in those blanks and get that information out there to you all. Last but not least, we are going to be in Atlanta next week. I just want to throw up this slide here. We will be in Atlanta next week with our National Training Institute, October 6th through the 8th. So if you're interested in attending, if you're in the Atlanta metro area and can zip over, feel free to come over. And for those of you who are not able to come, but we will have a virtual option as well. So feel free to register for that. Myself and Rob will be doing a session there around financial fraud. So if this topic is something that enthuses you, by all means come and participate in that as well. So without any other questions, I'll turn it over to Rob to see if he has any last thoughts, and we'll go ahead and wrap up.
All right, thanks, Rachel. I know we're at time, so I'll be brief, but I wanted to thank everybody on the panel for joining us. I'm so happy that we were able to get all of you together to have this great conversation. And I hope for everybody that tuned in, I hope that you did walk away with some additional information, or potentially a different thought on how the intersection of technology and financial fraud really truly does intersect, and how each one of us can play an active part in helping and assisting survivors and victims that encounter financial fraud one way or another. So with that, I'll thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panelists for joining, and hope that you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. And we will